The autumn wind carried dust and sage across the high plains of Wyoming territory, whistling through the weathered boards of Clay Maddox's ranch house. He stood on the porch, watching the horizon where the mountains rose like broken teeth against the fading light. 5 years had passed since he'd mustered out of the cavalry. 5 years since he'd buried his brother Samuel in a shallow grave outside Chattanooga. And still the nightmares came with clockwork precision. Clay's ranch sat 3 days' ride from the nearest town, nestled in a valley where the grass grew sparse and tough. It wasn't much. A main house, a bunkhouse that had stood empty since his last hand quit, a barn, and corrals for the horses that were his only reliable companions. At 32, he'd grown comfortable with solitude, preferred it even. The horses didn't ask questions about the scars on his back or why he sometimes woke shouting names of dead men. Old Pete Garrison had ridden up yesterday with news of a potential ranch hand looking for work. "Young fellow, goes by Jesse," Pete had said, shifting tobacco in his cheek. "Quiet type, but I seen him handle horses. Got gentle hands, might be worth your time." Clay needed the help. Winter was coming early this year. He could smell it in the air, feel it in his bones where old wounds ached. Managing 40 head of horses alone through a Wyoming winter was a fool's errand. But finding reliable help this far from civilization proved near impossible. The next morning, Jesse arrived just after dawn, riding a sturdy bay mare that had seen better days. Clay watched from the barn as the slight figure dismounted, moving with the careful grace of someone accustomed to long hours in the saddle. The boy, for that's what he appeared to be, couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, small-boned and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that didn't quite meet Clay's when they shook hands. "Pete Garrison sent me," Jesse said, voice pitched low and rough. "Said you might have work." Clay noted the firm grip, the calluses that spoke of hard labor. The boy wore a heavy canvas jacket despite the morning's warmth, buttoned high at the throat. A battered hat shadowed his face. "Can you rope?" "Yes, sir." "Break horses?" "Done my share." "You running from something I should know about?" Jesse's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just looking for honest work. Mr. Maddox, I'll earn my keep." Clay studied him for a long moment. Something about the boy seemed off. The way he held himself, perhaps, or how he kept his distance even while standing still. But Clay had learned not to pry into other men's secrets. God knew he had enough of his own. $1 a day plus board. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse. We eat at sunrise and sunset. No drinking on the job. And I don't tolerate laziness or lies. That suit you?" "Yes, sir." "When do I start?" "Now. We've got fence to mend in the north pasture." Jesse proved to be everything Pete had promised and more. He worked without complaint through the blazing afternoons, handling wire and posts with steady efficiency. When they moved the horses to fresh grazing, Jesse demonstrated an uncanny ability to read the animals' moods, calming skittish mares with soft words Clay couldn't quite catch. As the days shortened and the nights grew cold, Clay found himself watching his new hand with increasing curiosity. Jesse never removed his jacket. Even when sweat darkened the fabric, he always volunteered for the dawn water runs, returning from the stream fully dressed while other hands Clay had employed would wash shirtless in the morning sun. At meals, Jesse ate quickly and quietly, excusing himself before Clay could pour the customary evening whiskey. "You don't drink?" Clay asked one night as Jesse rose from the table. "Never acquired the taste, Mr. Maddox." "Just Clay's fine. We're not so formal out here." Jesse nodded, but didn't sit back down. "I'll check on the mare with the split hoof before turning in." Clay watched him go, noting again that peculiar gracefulness in his walk, a certain delicacy in how he moved through doorways. He'd known plenty of young men who'd been slight of build, but something about Jesse didn't fit the pattern. The first frost came in early October, silvering the grass and sending the horses into frisky morning gallops. Clay and Jesse worked side by side, preparing for winter, patching the barn roof, stacking hay, checking and rechecking the water troughs for cracks. Jesse learned quickly, anticipating needs before Clay voiced them. One evening, Clay returned from town with supplies to find Jesse sitting by the fire, playing a harmonica. The melody was haunting, some half-remembered tune that spoke of loss and longing. Jesse stopped abruptly when he noticed Clay. "Don't quit on my account," Clay said, settling into his chair. "Been a long time since I heard music." Jesse hesitated, then resumed playing, softer now. Clay closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him. For a moment, he was back in Tennessee, listening to Samuel play the same instrument around a campfire, before the war took everything. He woke with a start, the old nightmare fresh, Samuel's face as the bullet struck. The way he'd fallen so slowly, it seemed like the world had stopped. Jesse was still by the fire, no longer playing, just watching the flames. "You were calling out," Jesse said quietly. "A name, Samuel." Clay rubbed his face, feeling the stubble and the weariness. "My brother died at Chickamauga." "I'm sorry. Long time ago now. Doesn't make it hurt less." Clay looked at Jesse sharply. The boy's face was half in shadow, but there was something in his voice, an understanding born of personal experience. "You lose someone too?" Jesse was quiet for so long, Clay thought he wouldn't answer. "My father, 3 years back." "How?" "Men wanted our land, when he wouldn't sell." Jesse's voice trailed off. Clay didn't push. He understood how some stories were too heavy for words. As October waned, they fell into an easy rhythm. Jesse proved adept with a rifle, and they hunted together, bringing down deer for winter meat. Clay taught him to read weather signs, to doctor minor horse injuries, to mend tack with sturdy stitches. Jesse absorbed it all with quiet intensity. The first real storm struck on a Wednesday. Clay had been fixing a stall door when his back seized, the old injury from a cavalry fall flaring to life. He cursed, gripping the rail as spasms shot down his spine. Jesse appeared as if from nowhere. "Let me help." "I'm fine," Clay growled, but his legs betrayed him, buckling slightly. Jesse caught his arm, surprisingly strong for someone so slight. "Come on." "You need to lie down." Too pain-blind to argue. Clay let Jesse guide him to the house, ease him onto his bed. Jesse's hands were gentle as they helped remove Clay's boots. "Where's the injury?" "Lower back, left side. Old break that didn't heal right." Jesse hesitated, then said, "I know some things about healing. My mother taught me. Would you let me try?" Clay nodded, not trusting his voice. Jesse helped him roll onto his stomach, then carefully lifted his shirt. Those gentle hands worked along his spine, finding the knots of tension, applying pressure that somehow eased the fire. Clay bit back a groan of relief. "You've done this before," he managed. "My father had similar troubles. Heavy lifting and age don't mix well." Jesse worked in silence for several minutes, and Clay found himself relaxing despite the intimacy of the situation. There was something almost familiar about Jesse's touch, something that stirred memories of before the war, before he'd learned to armor himself against gentleness. "Better?" Jesse asked, stepping back. "Much, thank you." Jesse nodded and turned to go, but paused at the door. "There's liniment in my saddlebags. I'll fetch it for tonight." After he left, Clay lay still, troubled by the racing of his pulse. It was gratitude, he told himself. Simple relief from pain, nothing more. But that night, as he listened to Jesse's harmonica drifting from the bunkhouse, Clay admitted what he'd been trying to ignore. The way Jesse moved, the softness of those hands, the pitch of his voice when caught off guard. It all pointed to a truth that seemed impossible, yet increasingly undeniable. His ranch hand, Jesse, was keeping a secret, one that could destroy them both if discovered. And Clay, despite every instinct screaming danger, found himself wanting to protect that secret, even as he wondered what else lay hidden beneath Jesse's careful disguise. The wind howled outside, bringing the smell of snow. Winter was coming to the high country, and with it, Clay sensed revelations that would shatter the careful peace they'd built. But for now, he lay still and listened to the music, letting it carry him toward dreams that, for once, held no gunfire, no dying brothers, only the image of dark eyes that wouldn't quite meet his own, and hands gentle enough to soothe away old pain. The November cold settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, turning breath to frost and making every morning chore a battle against numb fingers. Clay found himself watching Jesse more carefully now, cataloging details he'd previously dismissed, the way Jesse always wore gloves, even indoors, how he never joined Clay for the customary evening wash at the pump, the careful distance maintained between them, as if Jesse feared proximity might reveal too much. They were hauling timber from the upper ridge when it happened. A rope snapped under the weight of the logs, sending the load sliding sideways. Jesse jumped clear but caught his shoulder against a pine trunk. Crying out in pain, Clay was beside him in an instant. "Let me see. It's nothing," Jesse gasped, clutching his left shoulder, face pale beneath the tan. "Don't be stubborn." Clay reached for Jesse's jacket. "No," Jesse jerked back, then winced at the movement. "I mean, I can manage." Their eyes met, and Clay saw real fear there, the kind that went deeper than physical pain. He backed off, hands raised. "All right, but if it's not better by evening, I'm taking you to town for the doctor." Jesse nodded tightly, struggling to his feet. They finished loading in tense silence, Jesse favoring his injured shoulder but refusing further help. That night, Clay lay awake puzzling over what he'd seen in that brief moment of struggle. The way Jesse's jacket had pulled tight across his chest, revealing curves that didn't belong on any ranch hand. He thought of his mother, dead these 15 years, and how she'd bound her ribs once after a fall from a horse. The memory brought sudden clarity. The next morning, Clay rose earlier than usual, driven by restless energy. He was heading to the barn when he noticed something hanging on the line behind the bunkhouse, a long strip of white cloth, still damp from washing. Jesse must have hung it in the pre-dawn darkness, expecting it to dry before Clay made his rounds. Clay stood frozen, staring at the binding cloth as understanding crystallized into certainty. His mind raced through a dozen implications, each more dangerous than the last. A woman living as a man in Wyoming territory faced risks he didn't want to contemplate. And he, knowingly harboring such a secret, would be equally damned in the eyes of the law and society. He should send Jesse away. Today. Now. Before this went any further. Instead, he quietly removed the cloth from the line and left it folded on Jesse's bunk, saying nothing. The day passed in charged silence. Jesse moved stiffly, clearly in pain but determined to work through it. They repaired fencing until sunset painted the mountains crimson. As they walked back to the barn, Clay noticed Jesse stumble slightly. "That shoulder's worse than you let on." Jesse's jaw tightened. "I've worked through worse." "No doubt, but there's no sense in it. Come to the house. I've got willow bark tea that'll help with the pain." For a moment, he thought Jesse would refuse again. Then, shoulders sagging with exhaustion, Jesse nodded. In the kitchen, Clay busied himself with the kettle while Jesse sat rigidly at the table. The lamplight caught the fine bones of Jesse's face, the delicate line of throat above the high collar. How had he not seen it before? Why? The question escaped before Clay could stop it. Jesse's hand stilled around the cup. Why what? Why live this way? It can't be easy. A bitter smile touched Jesse's lips. Easier than the alternative. You ever try to run a ranch as a woman alone? Make a living when no one will hire you for anything but cooking or washing? Walk down a street without men assuming you're available? Clay had no answer to that. He'd never considered such things. "My name is Jesse," the quiet voice continued. "Jesse Dawson. That part's true. My father called me that because he wanted a son. Guess he got his wish. In the end, the men who killed him, they're still after you?" Jesse's knuckles whitened around the cup. "They want the land, forged papers saying Pa sold it to them before he died. When I protested, they accused me of his murder. Sheriff believed them. 3 upstanding cattlemen against 1 hysterical girl. So you ran. So I cut my hair, bound my chest, and became what I needed to be to survive." Jesse looked up then, meeting Clay's eyes with defiance. "I'm a good hand. I earn my wages fair. That's all that should matter. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Jesse stood abruptly. I should go. Sit down. The command in Clay's voice surprised them both. I'm not throwing you out. Jesse sank back into the chair, uncertainty replacing defiance. Why? Clay considered the question. Why indeed? The smart choice was to distance himself from this complication. But when he looked at Jesse, really looked, he saw courage that put his own to shame. This slight person had survived alone in a hostile world through sheer determination and will. Because you're right. You're a good hand. And because... He paused, searching for words. Because I know what it's like to be someone you're not. To carry secrets that would destroy you, if revealed. Jesse studied him with those dark, watchful eyes. What secrets could a man like you have? Clay almost laughed at that. If only Jesse knew the nights he'd lain awake in the cavalry, trying to understand why his eyes followed certain fellow soldiers, why he'd felt such grief when Thomas Brennan took a Apache arrow to the throat, why he'd chosen this lonely life rather than risk those feelings again. We all have our reasons for choosing isolation, he said finally. I won't pry into yours if you don't pry into mine. They sat in silence as the tea cooled between them. Finally, Jesse spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I only bind my chest by day. At night, in private, I can breathe freely. It's all I have left of who I really am. The confession hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Clay felt the weight of it, the trust it represented. Your secret's safe with me, he said. But Jesse, we need to be careful. If anyone suspects, I know. I've been careful for 3 years now. Not careful enough. I figured it out. Jesse's smile was rueful. You pay closer attention than most. Besides, I got comfortable here, let my guard down. That could get you killed. Or worse. Jesse stood, favoring the injured shoulder. Thank you for the tea, and for understanding. Clay watched Jesse walk to the door, noting again that unconscious grace, the sway that spoke of hips beneath the loose trousers. At the threshold, Jesse paused. My real name, my full name, is Juliet, but I haven't been her in so long. I'm not sure she exists anymore. Then Jesse was gone, leaving Clay alone with the cooling kettle and the weight of shared secrets. That night, he stood at his window watching the bunkhouse, where lamplight flickered through thin curtains. He imagined Jesse, Juliet, unwinding the binding cloths, finally able to breathe freely in the darkness. The thought stirred something in him, a protective instinct mixed with an attraction he didn't want to examine too closely. He'd built this isolated life to avoid such complications, to never again feel what he'd felt for Thomas Brennan. Yet here was Jesse, bringing danger and desire in equal measure, threatening the walls Clay had so carefully constructed. The smart thing would be to maintain distance, to pretend this conversation never happened, to go back to the careful dance of employer and hand. But as he watched the light finally go out in the bunkhouse, Clay knew that line had already been crossed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the constant vigilance needed to protect Jesse's secret, the careful choreography required to avoid suspicion. But tonight, for just a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different world, one where a woman didn't have to hide behind men's clothes to survive, where a man could love whom he chose without fear or shame. The wind picked up, rattling the windows and bringing the scent of snow. Winter was coming in earnest now, and with it, months of close quarters and shared solitude. Clay turned from the window, already knowing he was lost. Whatever Jesse was or wasn't, whatever dangers lay ahead, he would protect her. Because sometime between that first handshake and tonight's quiet confession, Jesse Dawson had become essential to him in ways that transcended mere employment. And Clay Maddox, who'd thought his heart buried with his brother at Chickamauga, felt it stirring to painful life once more. The blizzard struck on the second week of December, howling down from the mountains with a fury that turned the world white. Clay and Jesse barely managed to get the horses secured before visibility dropped to nothing. They stumbled back to the main house together, fighting against wind that threatened to knock them flat. The bunkhouse won't hold in this. Clay shouted over the storm. catching Jessie's arm as she stumbled. "You'll stay in the house till it passes." Jessie nodded, too breathless to argue. Inside, they stood dripping in the kitchen, both shaking from cold and exertion. Clay stoked the fire until it roared, then fetched blankets from the bedroom. "You're half frozen," he said, noticing Jessie's blue-tinged lips. "Get those wet clothes off before you catch your death." Jessie hesitated, clutching the blanket. "I'll manage. For God's sake, I'll turn my back, but you need dry clothes now." Clay made good on his promise, busying himself with heating water for coffee while Jessie changed behind him. He heard the wet garments hitting the floor, the rustle of blankets. When he turned back, Jessie sat wrapped in wool, dark hair plastered to her head, looking impossibly young and vulnerable. The storm raged for 2 days. They lived in close quarters, sharing meals, tending the fire, playing cards by lamplight. The forced intimacy wore at their careful boundaries. Clay found himself studying Jessie's hands as she dealt cards, long-fingered, graceful despite the calluses. Jessie, in turn, watched Clay with increasing openness, as if the storm had suspended normal rules. On the second night, Jessie developed a fever. Clay found her shivering uncontrollably despite the blankets, skin burning hot to touch. "We need to break this fever," he said, fighting down panic. The nearest doctor was days away in good weather. Impossible to reach now. He bathed Jessie's face with cool water, noting the delicate features beneath the sun-weathered exterior, without the binding cloths. Her form was unmistakably feminine beneath the blankets. Clay forced himself to focus on the illness, not the woman. Jessie rambled in her delirium, sometimes calling for her father, sometimes speaking of blood and gunfire. Clay held her through the worst of it, whispering reassurances, praying to a god he'd half forgotten. Near dawn, the fever broke. Jessie's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Clay's face. "You stayed," she whispered. "Where else would I go?" Jessie's hand found his, squeezing weakly. "Thank you." Clay squeezed back, throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. "Rest now. Storm's passing." But neither moved. They stayed like that, hands clasped, as pale winter sunlight crept across the floor. Something had shifted between them during the long night, some final wall crumbling under the weight of shared vulnerability. When Jessie was strong enough to sit up, Clay made breakfast, biscuits and preserves, strong coffee. They ate in companionable silence, the intimacy of the past days hanging between them like a physical presence. "I should check the horses," Jessie said finally. "I'll go." "You're still weak." Clay, his name on her lips, stopped him cold. "We can't pretend nothing's changed." He turned slowly. Jessie sat wrapped in his blanket, looking at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "I know what this is," she continued. "What's happening between us? I'm not naive. Jessie, I've seen how you look at me when you think I don't notice. And God help me, I look at you the same way." Clay gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. "It's impossible. You know that." "Is it?" Jessie stood, the blanket falling away to reveal she wore one of his shirts, hanging loose on her smaller frame. "We're already living outside society's rules. What's one more transgression?" "Don't." The word came out harsher than intended. "You don't understand what you're suggesting. Then explain it to me." Jessie stepped closer, and Clay caught her scent, soap and wood smoke and something uniquely her. "Tell me why two people who found each other in this God-forsaken wilderness can't take what comfort they can find." Clay's control, held by threads since that first night of revelation, finally snapped. He pulled Jessie against him, one hand tangling in her still damp hair, and kissed her with all the desperate longing of his lonely years. Jessie made a soft sound and melted into him, arms winding around his neck. The kiss deepened, became something wild and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is why," Clay said roughly. "Because I can't do this halfway. Can't have you for a night or a season and then watch you leave. I'm not built that way." Jesse's hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Who says I'm leaving?" "You will. When the weather breaks, when those men come looking again. You'll have to run, and then come with me." The simple statement hung between them. Clay stared at her. This remarkable woman who'd survived so much, who offered him a future he'd never dared imagine. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." Jesse's thumb stroked his cheekbones. "I'm asking you to choose living over mere existence, to take a chance on something that could be wonderful or terrible or both." Clay closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, his decision was made. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the softness of her mouth, the way she sighed against him. "The horses," he murmured against her lips. "Can wait," Jesse finished, pulling him toward the bedroom. They came together with desperate tenderness, two lonely souls finding harbor in each other. Clay worshipped every inch of skin revealed to him, marveling at the contrast between Jesse's work-hardened hands and the silk-soft skin of her throat, her breasts, the curve of her hip. Jesse, in turn, traced the scars that marked Clay's body, the saber cut across his ribs, the bullet wound in his shoulder, as if memorizing a map of all he'd survived. When they joined, it was with a sense of coming home, of finding something long lost and nearly forgotten. They moved together in the gray winter light, whispering endearments and promises that might have seemed foolish in any other context, but here felt sacred as vows. Afterward, they lay entwined, Jesse's head on Clay's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I should probably confess," Jessie said, a smile in her voice. "My real age, I'm 26, not 20. Clay chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Practically ancient." She swatted him gently. "And you?" 32 last August. A veritable grandfather." Jesse grew serious. "Clay, what happens now?" He tightened his arms around her. "Now we figure out how to keep you safe, how to build something together without the world tearing it apart." "You make it sound so simple." "Nothing about this is simple. But Jessie, Juliet," he felt her still at the use of her real name. "I've spent 5 years among the living dead, going through motions, existing but not living. You've changed that. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jessie propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face. "You mean that, with everything I have?" She kissed him then, soft and sweet, sealing the promise between them. Outside, the world lay buried under pristine white, all landmarks erased by the storm. Inside, two souls who'd thought themselves forever alone discovered that sometimes the greatest risks brought the greatest rewards. They had no illusions about the challenges ahead, the constant vigilance, the threat of discovery, the men who still hunted Juliet Dawson. But for now, in this stolen moment of peace, they had each other. Clay thought of his brother Samuel, of Thomas Brennan, of all the loves lost to war and circumstance. Then he looked at Jessie, fierce and tender in equal measure, and felt something he'd thought gone forever: hope. The sun climbed higher, setting the snow ablaze with diamond light. Soon they would have to rise, tend the horses, return to the careful charade that kept Jessie safe. But not yet, not just yet. For now, they held each other as the world remade itself in white, two hearts beating as one against the vast indifference of the winter sky. And in that holding, that choosing, they found a kind of salvation neither had dared to seek. The three riders appeared on the horizon just after dawn, dark shapes against the melting snow. Clay spotted them from the barn, where he'd been checking on a mare with colic. His blood ran cold as he recognized the deliberate pace of men on official business. "Jessie!" He strode quickly to where she was filling water troughs. "Riders coming! Get to the house!" Her face paled, but she moved without panic, walking steadily toward the back door. Clay forced himself to continue his morning routine, pitching hay as the riders approached. By the time they reached the ranch gate, he was leaning casually against the corral fence. The lead rider was a heavy-set man with badges pinned to his coat, A sheriff's deputy by the look of him. The other two had the hard-worn appearance of hired trackers. "Morning," Clay called out. Neither friendly nor hostile. "Clay Maddox?" The deputy didn't dismount. "Name's Bill Hartley, deputy sheriff from Carbon County. These men are Mr. Silas Polk and Mr. James Crawford." Clay nodded, recognizing the names. Polk and Crawford ran cattle operations known more for strong-arm tactics than quality beef. "What brings you gentlemen out this way?" "Looking for a fugitive," Hartley said, producing a worn paper. "Woman named Juliet Dawson. Wanted for the murder of her father, Benjamin Dawson, 3 years back. She's been living as a man, going by the name Jesse." Clay made a show of studying the paper, though his mind was racing. "Haven't seen any women around here, dressed as men or otherwise." Crawford, a lean man with predator's eyes, spoke up. "Funny thing, Maddox, we heard tell you recently hired a new hand, young fellow named Jesse." "I did. Good worker. But he's definitely male, I can assure you. Mind if we meet this hand of yours?" Polk's voice carried barely veiled threat. Clay shrugged. "He rode out before dawn to check the eastern boundary. Won't be back till evening." "Convenient," Crawford muttered. "Look," Clay said, injecting irritation into his voice. "I don't know what kind of wild tale you're chasing, but I've got work to do. My hand Jesse is a young man who's been nothing but reliable. If you want to waste your day waiting for him, you're welcome to it." Hartley studied Clay with lawman's eyes. "You'd swear to that? That your Jesse is male? On a Bible, if you've got one handy." The three men exchanged glances. "Finally," Hartley said. "We'll be back, Maddox. And if we find you've been harboring a fugitive, you'll find I've been telling the truth. Good day, gentlemen." They wheeled their horses and rode off. But Clay knew they'd be watching. He continued his chores with forced calm, every nerve screaming danger. Only when they were well out of sight did he return to the house. Jesse stood by the window, still pale but composed. "They'll be back. Tonight, most likely. They'll watch the roads. Try to catch you returning. I should leave now. While they're focused on the eastern route, I could slip out west." "No." Clay caught her shoulders. "Running now confirms their suspicions. We stick to the story. Clay, you can't—" "Listen to me. Go to the root cellar. There's a hidden space behind the potato bins. I built it during the range wars. You can stay there until they've searched and gone. And if they don't go," Clay's jaw tightened, "then we deal with that when it comes." Jesse searched his face. "You'd fight lawmen for me? I'd fight the devil himself for you." She kissed him fierce and quick. "I won't let you hang for me, Clay Maddox, and I won't let them take you. Now go." The day stretched endlessly. Clay worked with heightened awareness, noting fresh horse tracks on the ridge, the flash of sunlight on metal that might be field glasses. They were watching. All right. As sunset approached, he made a show of watching the eastern trail, even calling out Jesse a few times. Then, shoulders slumped in apparent frustration, he headed for the house. They came just after full dark, not just the 3 from morning, but 5 more men besides. Clay met them on the porch, rifle visible but not raised. "Evening, deputy. Brought reinforcements." "I see. Your hand never showed," Hartley said accusingly. "No, and I'm getting worried. It's not like him to stay out after dark." "Mind if we search the property?" Clay hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant rather than prepared. "I suppose, though I don't take kindly to having my word doubted." They searched thoroughly. The barn, the bunkhouse, every outbuilding. Clay's heart hammered as they approached the root cellar. But the hidden space held. They found nothing? Crawford wasn't satisfied. "The house. Now wait a minute. The house, Maddox, or we'll get a warrant and come back with 20 men. Clay stepped aside with ill grace. They tracked mud through his home, pawing through closets and checking under beds. In his bedroom, Polk held up one of Clay's shirts. "This looks a mite small for you, Maddox. It's shrunk in washing. That's what I get for not having a woman's touch around here. Crawford picked up something from the washstand, a leather hair tie Clay hadn't noticed. His blood froze. Interesting thing for a bachelor to have. Clay forced a laugh. That's been there since my mother died. Sentimental value. They stared at each other, violence crackling in the air. Then Hartley intervened. All right, we've seen enough. But Maddox, I'm posting men on the roads. If this Jesse of yours shows up, we'll want to talk to him. I'll send him to town myself if he returns. Like I said, I'm worried something's happened to him. After they left, Clay waited a full hour before retrieving Jessie from the cellar. She emerged dusty and shaken, falling into his arms. They'll watch for days, she said against his shoulder. I'm trapped. No, they'll watch for Jessie the ranch hand, not for Mrs. Clay Maddox heading to Denver to visit family. Jessie pulled back, staring. What? Clay framed her face with his hands. I've been thinking all day. We'll wait a week. Let them get comfortable. Then I'll go to town. Mention I'm traveling to Denver on business. You'll leave dressed as a woman. My wife. We'll take the train from Laramie. Start fresh somewhere they'll never think to look. Clay, you can't just abandon your ranch. It's land and horses. Jessie, you're my life. Tears tracked down her cheeks. And if they recognize me, they're looking for a boy named Jesse, not a married woman in traveling clothes. Besides, he smiled slightly. I have my mother's things stored away. Dresses, bonnets, even jewelry. You'll look every inch the respectable rancher's wife. Jessie laughed through her tears, a sound of mingled hope and fear. This is madness. Maybe, but I'd rather be mad with you than sane alone. They held each other as the wind howled outside, both knowing the danger had only intensified. The next days would require Oscar-worthy performances, careful planning, nerves of steel. One mistake would doom them both. But as Clay felt Jesse's heart beating against his, he knew with bone-deep certainty that this was right. Whatever came next, flight or fight, freedom or catastrophe, they would face it together. I love you, Jesse whispered. The first time either had said the words aloud. And I love you. Juliet Dawson, soon to be Maddox. Whatever name you wear, whatever face you show the world, you're mine and I'm yours. Outside, he knew watchers lurked in the darkness, waiting for Jesse the fugitive to return. Let them wait. When next they left this ranch, it would be as man and wife, bound for a future neither could fully imagine but both would fight to claim. The game had shifted, the stakes raised to life or death, but Clay had learned in war that sometimes the boldest moves were the safest, that audacity could succeed where caution failed. In a week's time, they would roll the dice on that principle. Until then, they would play their parts, guard their secrets, and steal what moments they could in the shadow of constant danger. The candle flickered in the window, a beacon that would never guide Jesse the ranch hand home. But perhaps, Clay thought as he held his love close, it might light the way to something better, a life lived true, whatever the cost. Spring came late to the high country that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the landscape with violent beauty. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in purple and gold, and the air carried the sweet scent of new grass. Clay and Jesse had made it through the winter's danger, maintaining their charade while the watchers gradually lost interest and drifted away. On a crystalline morning in early April, Clay saddled 2 horses and packed provisions for a day's ride. Come on, he told Jesse, who was mending harness in the barn. Work can wait. Where are we going? You'll see. They rode up through stands of aspen just beginning to leaf out, following game trails Clay had learned in his solitary years. Jessie had never looked more beautiful to him than she did now, riding astride in her men's clothes but with her hair grown longer, catching the sunlight. The constant fear of the past months had eased, though they both knew danger still lurked. Clay led them to a high meadow he'd discovered years ago, where a spring-fed pool reflected the sky like captured heaven. They dismounted, and Jessie gasped at the beauty of it, the circle of peaks, the carpet of flowers, the sense of being alone at the top of the world. "It's perfect," she breathed. "I used to come here after Samuel died," Clay said, spreading a blanket near the pool. "Only place that made sense anymore. Never brought anyone else here." Jesse took his hand. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They spent the morning in lazy contentment, talking of everything and nothing. Clay had brought cold chicken and biscuits, early strawberries from the garden Jesse had coaxed into life. They fed each other berries, laughing when juice stained their fingers. "I want to swim," Jesse announced suddenly. "Water's snowmelt. You'll freeze. I've been bound up all winter. Clay, I want to feel free." She stood and began unbuttoning her shirt with deliberate slowness. Clay watched, mesmerized, as she revealed herself layer by layer until she stood naked in the mountain sunlight, proud and unashamed, without the binding, without the men's clothes. She was gloriously, undeniably woman. "Join me?" she asked, then shrieked with laughter as she plunged into the icy pool. Clay stripped and followed, the cold stealing his breath, but Jesse's joy warming him through. They splashed like children, chasing each other through the shallows, their laughter echoing off the peaks. When they could stand the cold no longer, they collapsed on the blanket, shivering and seeking each other's warmth. They made love there in the meadow, surrounded by flowers and birdsong, with no fear of discovery. It was different from their winter couplings. Those had been desperate, shadowed by danger. This was celebration, affirmation, a claiming of joy and defiance of all they'd endured. Afterward, they lay drowsing in the sun, Jesse's head on Clay's chest, his fingers combing through her drying hair. "We should leave," she said quietly. "Take your plan. Go to Denver or beyond. Start fresh where no one knows us." "Is that what you want?" Jesse was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stop running. I want to plant a garden and watch it grow. I want to raise horses with you. Maybe even—" She trailed off. "Maybe even what?" "Children," she whispered. "Is that foolish, to want such normal things when our life is anything but normal?" Clay's throat tightened. "Not foolish at all. I want those things too. But we can't have them here. Not while I'm wanted. Not while we have to pretend. Then we fight to change that." The words surprised him. But as he spoke, certainty grew. "Jesse, what if instead of running, we fought back? Those men who killed your father, who pinned it on you, what if we exposed them?" Jesse sat up, staring at him. "How? It's been 3 years. Their word against mine." "Maybe, but men like that don't stop at one crime. There must be others they've wronged, other witnesses. If we could find proof." "Clay, they have the law on their side. Corrupt law. But there are honest lawmen too. Federal marshals who don't care about local politics." He caught her hands. "I have some money saved. We could hire a lawyer. A good one from Denver. Do this right." Hope and fear warred in Jesse's eyes. "And if we fail? If they hang me anyway? Then at least we tried. At least we fought for the life we want instead of accepting the one they forced on us." Jesse studied his face for a long moment, then smiled. A real smile, full of determination. "All right, we fight." They rode back as the sun westered, making plans. Clay would go to Denver, find a lawyer, begin making inquiries. Jessie would stay at the ranch, maintaining her disguise a little longer. It was risky, but less so than traveling together while she was still wanted. As they created a rise overlooking the ranch, Clay reined in sharply. Smoke rose from the direction of the barn. Too much smoke. "Fire!" He spurred his horse forward. Jessie close behind. They thundered into the yard to find the barn ablaze, horses screaming in terror. Without thought for danger, they plunged into the smoke, cutting horses free, driving them out. The heat was incredible, boards crashing down around them. Clay lost sight of Jessie in the chaos, called her name, then saw her struggling with a terror-stricken mare. Together they got the last horse out just as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. They stood coughing in the yard, watching months of hay and equipment consumed. "Look!" Jesse said, pointing. Words were painted on the side of the house in what looked like blood. Harboring fugitives is a hanging offense. Clay's blood ran cold, then hot with rage. They know. Somehow they know. We have to leave. Now. Tonight. Her words were cut off by the sound of approaching horses. Many horses. Clay pushed Jesse behind him, drawing his rifle. But they were already surrounded. Deputy Hartley rode at the head of 15 men, including Polk and Crawford. "Clay Maddox," Hartley called out. "You're under arrest for harboring a fugitive and aiding an escape. And you," Crawford pointed at Jesse with vicious satisfaction, "are under arrest for the murder of Benjamin Dawson." Jesse stepped out from behind Clay, shoulders squared. When she spoke, it was in her natural voice, higher and clearer than the forced bass she'd maintained for months. "I didn't kill my father. You did. Silas Polk. You and James Crawford and Martin Brenner shot him down when he wouldn't sell, then burned his body in the barn to hide the evidence. Lies from a desperate murderer." Polk sneered. "Though I admit you make a prettier picture than expected. Boys are going to enjoy the hanging." Clay moved toward Polk, murderous intent clear. But Jesse caught his arm. "No, that's what they want." She looked at Hartley. "Deputy, I'll come peacefully, but I want a proper trial, a federal judge, not some bought local magistrate." Hartley, who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. And Mr. Maddox acted from conscience." Jesse continued. "He believed in my innocence because I'm innocent. Whatever happens to me, he should go free. That's for a judge to decide." Hartley said, "Both of you need to come now." Clay and Jesse exchanged a long look. So much passed between them in that glance. Love, fear, determination, promise. Then Jesse turned to Hartley. "I need to change first. I won't be dragged to jail dressed as a man. I'll face this as who I am, Juliet Dawson, daughter of Benjamin Dawson, falsely accused but not broken." Hartley nodded. "5 minutes, Mrs. Brenner will accompany you." The schoolteacher's widow, part of the posse, followed Jesse into the house when they emerged. Jesse wore one of the dresses Clay had offered months ago, his mother's blue traveling dress. With her hair pinned up and her chin high, she looked every inch a lady. "I'm ready," she said simply. As they prepared to ride out, Clay managed to lean close to Jesse. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "I'll find a way. I'll find proof. Wait for me. Always?" she whispered back. Then they were separated, hands bound, hope suddenly fragile as spring ice. As they rode toward town, Clay looked back once at his ranch, the smoking ruins of the barn, the house that had sheltered their love, the meadows where they'd found fleeting happiness. He'd built this place as a fortress against feeling, a monument to isolation. Jesse had transformed it into a home. Now they were leaving it behind, riding toward judgment and possible death. But as he watched Jesse's straight back, the proud set of her shoulders despite the bonds, Clay felt not despair but fierce determination. They'd wanted to break her spirit with discovery and capture. Instead, they'd freed her to fight as herself. No more hiding, no more lies. The game had changed again. The battlefield shifted to courtrooms and legal proceedings. But Clay had learned that morning in the meadow what they were fighting for. Not just Jesse's freedom, but the right to live truthfully, to love without shame, to build the life they'd glimpsed in those perfect moments by the mountain pool. Whatever came next, they would face it as themselves. Clay and Juliet, not Jesse and her employer, but two people who'd found each other against all odds and refused to let go. The sun set behind them as they rode toward town, toward trial, toward a reckoning 3 years in the making, but also, perhaps, toward the first real chance at the future they both craved. Clay watched through iron bars as spring turned to early summer, marking time by the changing light that filtered into his cell. They'd kept him and Jesse separated, allowing only brief glimpses during transport to hearings. Each time he saw her, his heart clenched. She grew thinner but never bowed, maintaining a dignity that seemed to unnerve their captors, his lawyer. Thomas Hartwell from Denver, was a sharp-eyed man who'd taken the case for half Clay's savings and a promise of the rest if they won. "Your lady friend has stirred up quite the hornet's nest," Hartwell said during one of their meetings. "I've been investigating Polk and Crawford. Seems the Dawson Ranch wasn't their first suspicious acquisition. You found something? Maybe? There's a widow named Sarah Coleman whose husband died 2 years ago. Ranch burned, just like Dawson's. She was forced to sell cheap to Crawford. Too scared to talk before, but Miss Dawson's courage has inspired her." Clay gripped the bars. "Will she testify?" "She's considering it. I'm also tracking down a former ranch hand of Polk's, man named Miguel Herrera. Word is he saw things he shouldn't have." Days blurred together. Clay exercised in his cell, wrote letters to Jesse that the guards wouldn't deliver, and planned for a future that seemed increasingly distant. Then one morning, Hartwell arrived with news that changed everything. "Miguel Herrera's agreed to talk. Says he was there the night Benjamin Dawson died. Polk sent him away before the shooting, but he circled back, worried about trouble. Saw the whole thing from the barn loft. Why didn't he come forward before? Polk threatened his family, but his wife died last winter. Kids are grown and gone. He's got nothing left to lose and a guilty conscience to clear." Hope, dangerous and intoxicating, bloomed in Clay's chest. "When's the trial?" 2 weeks. Federal judge named William Patterson. He's got a reputation for being fair but tough. Won't tolerate courtroom theatrics." Clay spent those 2 weeks in fevered preparation, going over testimony with Hartwell until every word was perfect. On the morning of the trial, they cleaned him up, put him in his best suit. As they led him to the courthouse, he caught sight of Jessie being brought from the women's section of the jail. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back severely, but when their eyes met, she smiled. Just a flash, but enough to strengthen his resolve. The courtroom was packed. Clay recognized ranchers, townspeople, curious strangers drawn by the sensation of a woman living as a man. Polk and Crawford sat in the front row, confident despite the circumstances. Judge Patterson, a stern man with silver sideburns, called the court to order. The prosecutor, a nervous young man named Jennings, laid out the case against Jessie, her father's death, her flight, her deception. He painted her as a calculating murderess who'd used feminine wiles to corrupt an honest rancher. Then Hartwell rose. "Your Honor, we'll prove that Miss Dawson is innocent of all charges save one, the charge of wanting to survive in a world that offers few options to women alone. We'll show that the real murderers sit in this very courtroom, protected by wealth and influence until now." The first day was grueling. Witnesses for the prosecution painted Jessie as unstable, unwomanly. They brought up her deception, her wearing of men's clothes, as if that alone proved guilt. Clay watched Jessie endure it all with quiet grace, though he could see the toll in the tightness around her eyes. On the second day, Hartwell called Sarah Coleman, the widow, dressed in mourning black, spoke quietly but clearly about her husband's death, the threats, the forced sale of their ranch. "They said if I didn't sell, I'd burn too," she testified. "Said it would look like an accident, just like the others." "Objection!" the prosecutor shouted. "Hearsay and speculation!" Overruled. Judge Patterson said coldly, "Continue, Mrs. Coleman." Then came Miguel Herrera. The former ranch hand was visibly nervous, but his testimony was devastating. He described the night of Benjamin Dawson's murder in detail, how Polk, Crawford, and Martin Brenner had arrived at the ranch, how they'd argued with Dawson, how they'd shot him when he refused to sell. They made it look like the girl did it. Herrera said, "Planted evidence, burned the body in the barn. Said she'd gone crazy, killed her own father. But I saw it all." The courtroom erupted. Judge Patterson pounded his gavel, threatening to clear the room. Polk and Crawford were on their feet, shouting denials. "Why should we believe you?" Jennings asked desperately when order was restored. "You've been paid to lie." "No one's paid me nothing," Herrera said firmly. "I'm dying. Doc says I got maybe 6 months. I want to meet my maker with a clear conscience." On the third day, Clay testified. He spoke of hiring Jessie, of gradually discovering her secret, of choosing to protect her because he believed in her innocence. You fell in love with her. Jennings accused. You'd say anything to save her. Yes, I love her, Clay said simply. But I'd never lie for her. She doesn't need lies. The truth is enough. Finally, Jessie took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke of finding her father's body, of realizing she'd been framed, of the desperate decision to disguise herself and flee. I could have stayed and hanged for a crime I didn't commit, she said, her voice clear and strong. Or I could run and try to survive. I chose survival. If that makes me guilty, then I'm guilty of wanting to live. You lived as a man. Jennings pressed. You deceived everyone, including Mr. Maddox. I did what I had to do. Have you ever tried to get honest work as a woman alone? Mr. Jennings, ever been propositioned just for walking down a street? Ever been told your only value is in marriage or other services? Jessie's eyes flashed. I bound my chest and cut my hair because it let me work, earn honest wages, be judged on my merit instead of my anatomy. Hartwell's closing argument was masterful. He painted a picture of corruption, greed, and the lengths powerful men would go to increase their holdings. He spoke of Jessie's courage, her determination to survive against overwhelming odds. She stands accused of deception, Hartwell concluded. But which is the greater deception? A woman dressing as a man to earn honest wages, or men who murder and frame innocents for profit? The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Clay held his breath, reaching for Jessie's hand despite the bailiff's glare. On the charge of murder, the foreman read, We find the defendant, Juliet Dawson, not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Jessie sagged against Clay, tears streaming down her face. But Judge Patterson wasn't finished. Mr. Crawford, you're under arrest for the murder of Benjamin Dawson. And Mr. Maddox? Clay straightened. The charges against you are dismissed. You showed more honor in protecting an innocent than those who claim to uphold the law. In the chaos that followed, Clay lost sight of Jessie. Deputies were arresting Polk and Crawford. Spectators were shouting, reporters pushing forward. Then suddenly she was there, throwing herself into his arms in full view of everyone. It's over, she whispered against his neck. Clay, it's really over. He held her tightly, not caring who saw, not caring what anyone thought. They'd won more than a legal victory. They'd won the right to live openly, honestly, without fear or pretense. Later, as they walked from the courthouse into the summer evening, Jessie stopped suddenly. Clay, look. He followed her gaze to see his old friend Amos, the mountain man who'd nearly betrayed them, standing awkwardly by a hitching post. Came to say I'm sorry, Amos mumbled. Heard what them bastards did. Should have known you wouldn't harbor no real criminal. Jessie surprised them both by stepping forward and taking Amos's gnarled hand. It's forgiven. You were thinking of the law, not justice. Now we have both. As they made their way to the hotel where Hartwell had secured rooms, townspeople watched with curiosity and, in some cases, newfound respect. The woman who'd fooled them all, who'd worked alongside them as a man, who'd faced down accusations with courage. She was already becoming legend. What now? Jessie asked as they climbed the hotel stairs. Now we go home, Clay said. Rebuild the barn, restart our lives, together, properly. As husband and wife. Clay stopped on the landing, cupping her face in his hands. If you'll have me, no more hiding, no more pretense, just Clay and Juliet, building a life in the open. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. They kissed there on the landing, in full view of the hotel clerk and arriving guests. It was their first truly public kiss. Free of fear or shame, it tasted of victory and promise and the sweet freedom of truth. Tomorrow would bring challenges, rebuilding the ranch, facing those who still disapproved, creating a life together without the strange protection of secrets. But tonight, they had each other and the precious gift of justice served. As Clay led Jesse to their room, he thought of that first day she'd arrived at his ranch, small and determined under her disguise. He'd hired Jesse the ranch hand, but found Juliet the woman. In trying to save her, he'd saved himself. The circle was complete. The truth had set them both free. The courtroom victory should have been the end of their troubles, but Clay learned that justice and peace were different creatures entirely. The morning after the trial, he woke to find Jesse gone from their hotel room. A note on her pillow. "Need supplies. Back soon. Jay." Clay dressed quickly, unease prickling his spine. The hotel clerk mentioned seeing her leave before dawn, heading toward the general store. But when Clay arrived there, the proprietor shook his head. "Haven't seen her. Mr. Maddox, though there was some commotion down by the livery earlier." Clay's walk turned to a run. At the livery stable, he found signs of struggle, scattered hay, an overturned bucket, Jesse's hair ribbon caught on a nail. The stable boy, Tim, was nursing a black eye. "They took her," Tim gasped. "3 men, not from around here, said something about unfinished business." Clay's blood turned to ice. "Which way?" "North, toward the old mine road." Clay saddled his fastest horse, strapped on his guns, and rode hard. The trail was fresh. 3 horses moving fast but not trying to hide their tracks. They were either confident or careless. Both possibilities chilled him. He caught up to them at Willow Creek Crossing, where they'd stopped to water the horses. Jessie sat bound on her mount, chin high despite a bruise darkening her cheek. The 3 men were strangers, hired guns by their look. Clay dismounted silently, using creek noise to mask his approach. He recognized their type, men who killed for money without conscience or question. One wore a marshal's badge, likely stolen or bought. "Don't see why we can't have some fun before we deliver her," one was saying. "Brenner's paying us either way." Martin Brenner, the 3rd partner in her father's murder, who'd fled before the trial. Clay should have known he'd seek revenge. Jesse spat at the speaker's feet. "Touch me and I'll kill you myself." The man raised his hand to strike her, and Clay stepped from cover, rifle leveled. "I'd think twice about that." The 3 spun, hands moving for weapons, but Clay already had the drop. "Hands high, now." "This ain't your concern, Mr." The one with the badge said, "We're lawfully appointed. You're hired killers working for a murderer. Only question is whether you ride out alive or across your saddles." The moment stretched taut. Then the youngest of the 3 went for his gun. Clay's rifle spoke once, and the man crumpled. The other 2 froze. "Next one moves, joins him." Clay said coldly, "Unbuckle your gun belts, slowly." They complied, fear replacing bravado. Clay kept them covered while cutting Jessie free. She slid from the horse and grabbed one of the discarded pistols in one smooth motion. "You all right?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the men. "Better now?" Her voice was steady, but he heard the underlying shakiness. "You 2 got a choice," Clay told the survivors. "Ride out now. Keep riding till you're out of the territory. I see you again, I'll kill you on sight. Or stay and explain to the real law how you kidnapped a woman the federal court just declared innocent." They chose to ride, spurring their horses hard north. Clay watched until they were dust on the horizon, then turned to Jessie. She stood trembling, the pistol still clutched in her hands. "It's not over," she said. "Brenner's still out there. He'll send more. Then we'll be ready." Clay pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry. I should have been with you. You can't guard me every moment." She pulled back, jaw set with determination. "Teach me to shoot properly, not just hunting, but fighting. If men like Brenner want war, I'll give them one." They spent 3 days in town, Clay teaching Jessie everything he'd learned in the cavalry about firearms and tactics. She proved a quick study, her smaller hand steady on the trigger, her aim improving rapidly. Word spread that Juliet Dawson was learning to defend herself, and curious townspeople gathered to watch. Some disapproved. Women shouldn't handle weapons that way. But others, particularly the married women who'd lived through the range wars, nodded approval. Sarah Coleman even brought Jessie a small derringer. "Fits in a pocket," she said. "My Henry gave me one like it. Saved my life more than once." On the fourth day, they prepared to return to the ranch, but as they loaded supplies, a rider approached, a young man in a federal marshal's uniform. This one legitimate. "Miss Dawson? Marshal Frank Morrison. I've been tracking Martin Brenner. Thought you should know he's gathered quite a gang. Maybe 8 men, all wanted for various crimes." "Where?" Clay asked. "Last seen heading this way. My guess is he plans to finish what he started." Morrison studied them both. "I could use some local help, men who know the territory." Jessie stepped forward. "I know where he'll go. There's a box canyon on what used to be my father's land. Brenner always said it would make a perfect holdout. If he's coming for me, that's where he'll ford up and wait." Morrison's eyes sharpened. "You willing to guide us there?" "Frank," Clay started, but Jessie cut him off. "I'm done running, done hiding. This ends now, one way or another." They rode out at dawn. Morrison, Clay, Jessie, and 4 deputized townsmen, including, surprisingly, Deputy Hartley, who'd arrested them months ago. "I owe you, folks," Hartley said gruffly. "Should have seen the truth earlier. The ride to the Dawson Ranch took most of the day." As they neared the land Jessie had once called home, her face grew tight with memory. The house was gone, burned to foundations, but the landscape remained, rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. They made camp a mile from the box canyon, planning their approach. Morrison wanted Jessie to stay back, but she refused. "I'm not some prize to be fought over. This is my fight more than anyone's." As darkness fell, they moved into position. Clay could see firelight in the canyon. Brenner was there. All right, they'd have to go in careful. Use the rocky terrain for cover. "Remember," Morrison whispered, "we want Brenner alive if possible. He's got information about other murders, other land grabs." They spread out, approaching from 3 sides. Clay kept Jessie close, every nerve alert for danger. The night was still, even the insects quiet, as if nature itself held its breath. Then everything exploded into chaos. One of Brenner's men spotted movement, shouted warning, gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like deadly fireflies. Clay pulled Jessie behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. The fight was fierce but brief. Morrison's men had superiority of position and righteousness. One by one, Brenner's hired guns fell or surrendered. Clay saw Brenner himself trying to flee up the canyon's back trail. "Stay here," he told Jessie. But she was already moving, following Brenner with deadly purpose. Clay cursed and followed. They cornered Brenner against a sheer rock face, the man who'd orchestrated so much death and pain. He looked older than Clay expected, gray-haired and paunchy, evil in its banal form. "Juliet Dawson," Brenner said, trying for bravado. "Should have killed you with your father. But you didn't," Jessie said, her pistol steady. "You let Polk and Crawford do the killing while you handled the paperwork. Always the coward." "Jessie," Clay warned, seeing her finger tighten on the trigger. "He killed my father, destroyed my life, made me live in fear for 3 years. Tears ran down her face, but her aim never wavered. "And now he'll hang for it," Clay said gently. "Legal and proper. Your father was a lawman once, wasn't he? He'd want justice, not vengeance." For a long moment, Jessie stood frozen. Then, slowly, she lowered the gun. "You're right. Pa believed in the law, even when it failed him." Morrison appeared, quickly taking Brenner into custody. The marshal looked at Jessie with new respect. That took courage. Miss more than pulling the trigger would have. As dawn broke over the canyon, they tallied the results. 3 of Brenner's men dead, 4 captured, Brenner himself in irons. Morrison would take them all to Denver for federal trial. "It's really over now," Clay said as they watched the prisoners being loaded for transport. Jessie leaned against him, exhausted but finally at peace. "No, now it begins. Now we can actually live without looking over our shoulders." They returned to Clay's ranch that afternoon. The burned barn was a black scar on the land, but the house stood welcoming. Jessie walked through it slowly, touching familiar things. "I want to bring my mother's rose bushes from the old place," she said. "Plant them by the porch. Make this truly home. Whatever you want, it's yours as much as mine now." Jessie turned to him, smiling through tears. "Then I want that wedding we talked about, a real one, in town, with everyone watching. I want to sign my real name in the register and wear my mother's wedding dress." "When?" "As soon as possible. I've waited long enough to be myself fully. No more delays, no more fear." Clay kissed her, tasting salt and sweetness and freedom. "Then we'd better get building. Can't have a wedding without a proper barn for the reception." Jessie laughed, the sound bright as morning. Practical as always. "Someone has to be Mrs. Soon-to-be Maddox." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. The long nightmare was over. Justice had prevailed, truth had triumphed, and love had survived against all odds. Tomorrow would bring work, rebuilding, replanting, creating the life they'd fought so hard to claim. But tonight, they had each other and the promise of all the tomorrows to come, each one free of disguise, deception, or fear. Jessie had started this journey binding her chest by day, hiding her true self to survive. Now she would live every day unbound, authentic and free. It was, Clay thought as he held her close, the greatest victory of all. The summer passed in a blur of rebuilding and renewal. Jessie threw herself into the work with characteristic determination, her hands as capable with hammer and saw as they'd ever been with rope and saddle. She wore dresses now when they went to town, but at the ranch, she dressed as practicality demanded. Sometimes in skirts, sometimes in her old work clothes. No longer needing to hide but choosing comfort for the task at hand. Clay watched her bloom like the wildflowers she'd planted around the new barn. Without the constant weight of deception, Jessie laughed more freely, moved with a natural grace, spoke in her true voice without fear. She'd kept her promise about the letters too, writing faithfully to Clay during his brief incarceration. Now he found one of those letters tucked in his shirt pocket as they worked. "I don't bind my chest anymore, not by day, not ever. I breathe freely now. My love, and each breath carries your name." The wedding was set for September, when the aspens would turn gold and the air would carry the crisp promise of autumn. Jessie had retrieved her mother's wedding dress from a trunk hidden at the old Coleman Ranch, where Sarah had kept it safe all these years. "Your mama was a good woman," Sarah said, "helping Jessie with alterations. She'd be so proud of who you've become." Word of the wedding spread, and with it came unexpected support. Ranchers who'd once employed Jessie sent congratulations. The schoolteacher organized the church flowers. Even gruff old Pete Garrison offered his best horses for the wedding carriage. But not everyone celebrated their happiness. Some folks still whispered about the unnatural woman who'd deceived them all. A few suggested Clay must be touched to marry such a creature. Jessie bore it all with dignity, though Clay saw the hurt flash in her eyes. One afternoon, as Jessie worked in her garden, a group of women from town arrived uninvited. Clay tensed, ready to intervene, but Jessie waved him back. "We've come to speak our minds," announced Mrs. Pritchard, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of the community. "Then speak," Jessie said calmly, not rising from her knees among the vegetables. "It ain't right." "Mrs. Pritchard declared, "You living here, bold as brass, after deceiving everyone? You should be ashamed." Jessie stood slowly, soil still clinging to her hands. "Ashamed of what, exactly? Of working honest labor? Of surviving when men tried to kill me? Of refusing to accept that my only value lay in marriage to someone who'd steal my land? Of pretending to be something you're not? I pretended to be a man to survive. You pretend to be righteous to feel superior. Which deception harms more?" Mrs. Pritchard flushed. "Well, I never—" "No, you never." Jessie continued, voice steady but eyes flashing. "You never had to flee for your life, never had to choose between starvation and dignity. Never had to bind yourself so tight you couldn't breathe, just to earn wages men take for granted. She stepped closer to the group, and several women shifted uncomfortably. I don't ask for your approval, only your absence from my land. But know this, every one of you benefits from what I did. I proved a woman can work as hard as any man, can shoot straight and ride true and build something lasting. Your daughters will have choices I didn't because women like me survived to expand what's possible. A younger woman in the back, Mrs. Turner, spoke up suddenly. She's right. My Hannah wants to study medicine. Doctor in Denver says he'll take female students now. 10 years ago, that was impossible. Mrs. Pritchard huffed, but the wind had gone from her sails. As the group departed, Mrs. Turner lingered. Thank you, she said quietly, for being brave enough to show us strength comes in different forms. That evening, Clay found Jessie staring at the sunset, tears on her cheeks. They had no right, he said, pulling her close. They had every right to their opinions, Jessie replied. But I have every right not to care. It's just, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly belong. You belong here. With me. That's all that matters. She turned in his arms, smiling through her tears. When did you become so wise? About the time a certain ranch hand arrived and turned my life upside down. September arrived with golden glory. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and crisp. The mountains etched sharp against a brilliant sky. Clay stood at the altar in his best suit, trying to calm his nerves as the church filled with guests. Then the music began, and Jessie appeared at the church doors. She wore her mother's dress, ivory silk that caught the light from the windows. Her hair was pinned up with small wildflowers woven through it, and she carried a bouquet of the roses she'd transplanted from her childhood home. But it was her face that stopped Clay's breath, radiant with joy. Eyes locked on his, smile tremulous but genuine. This was Jessie as she was meant to be, fully herself, hiding nothing. The ceremony was simple but moving. When it came time for vows, Jessie spoke clearly. I, Juliet Sarah Dawson, take you, Clayton Samuel Maddox, to be my husband. I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion that saved my life, to stand beside you in truth and trust, and to never again hide who I am from you or the world. Clay's voice was rough with emotion as he responded. I, Clayton Samuel Maddox, take you, Juliet Sarah Dawson, to be my wife. I promise to protect not just your body but your spirit, to honor the courage that brought you to me, and to love every facet of who you are, past, present, and future. When Reverend Mills pronounced them married, the church erupted in applause. Even some who'd come to gawk seemed moved by the obvious love between them. The reception in the new barn was joyful chaos. Tables groaned under the weight of donated food. Fiddle music filled the air, and couples danced on the fresh-laid floor. Jessie had changed into a simpler dress for dancing, and she and Clay led the festivities with an energy that drew everyone onto the floor. As the evening wore on, Clay noticed Jessie slip outside. He found her by the corral, watching the horses in the moonlight. Too much? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. No, it's perfect. I just needed a moment to believe it's real. She leaned back against him. For so long, I thought I'd never have this. Love, acceptance, a future to build instead of a past to run from. What do you see in that future? Jessie turned to face him, eyes bright with dreams. Children laughing in that house? A dozen horses in these pastures? Maybe a school where girls can learn to ride and shoot alongside their letters. A place where anyone who's different can find welcome. That's a big dream. We've survived big nightmares. I think we can handle big dreams. They returned to the celebration, dancing until the stars wheeled overhead and the last guests departed with good wishes. Finally, alone. They stood in their barn, surrounded by the evidence of community support, gifts, flowers, enough food to last a week. No more binding, Jessie said softly, running her hands down the bodice of her dress. No more hiding, no more fear. Never again. Clay agreed, drawing her close. From now on, every day is truth. A year later, Jesse stood in the same spot, cradling their infant daughter. Elizabeth Sarah Maddox had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she'd entered the world with a cry that suggested she'd inherited both parents' fighting spirit. "She'll never have to hide," Jessie whispered, adjusting the baby's blanket. "Never have to pretend to be anything but exactly who she is." Clay wrapped his arms around both of them, his whole world contained in that embrace. The ranch had prospered, their horse operation expanding with Jessie's expertise, openly acknowledged. They'd taken in 2 young women fleeing bad situations, teaching them the skills they'd need to survive independently. The school Jessie had dreamed of was still just plans on paper, but Clay had no doubt it would become reality. "Remember that first day?" he asked. "You rode up, trying so hard to pitch your voice low, shoulders squared like you were heading into battle?" Jessie smiled. "I was terrified you'd see through me immediately. Part of me did. I think just took a while to admit what I was seeing." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best hiring decision I ever made? Even with all the trouble that followed?" "Especially with all the trouble. It brought us here." Elizabeth stirred, making the soft sounds that preceded demanding cries. Jessie began walking toward the house, then paused, looking back at Clay with an expression of perfect contentment. "Coming home?" she asked. "Home?" Yes, that's what they'd built here, not just a ranch, but a haven. A place where truth could flourish alongside the vegetables in Jessie's garden, where love could grow as strong as the cottonwoods by the stream, where a woman who'd once bound herself to survive could breathe free, raise her daughter in freedom, and face each dawn unafraid. "Right behind you," Clay said, following his wife and daughter into the house where lamplight beckoned warm against the gathering dusk. Always. The moon rose over the Wyoming mountains, silvering the ranch where Clayton and Juliet Maddox were writing their own story, not one of deception and flight, but of courage rewarded, love triumphant, and the revolutionary act of living truthfully in a world that often preferred comfortable lies. And, in her mother's arms, Elizabeth Sarah Maddox slept peacefully, already blessed with the greatest gift her parents could give, the freedom to be exactly who she was meant to be, forever and always, without apology or disguise. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West, where love and courage conquered fear and prejudice. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from, whether you're driving through the plains, sitting by your own campfire, or perhaps binding your own wounds from life's battles. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts below. Remember, like Jessie and Clay discovered, sometimes the greatest adventure is simply being brave enough to be yourself. Happy trails, partners.